Howdy, y'all.
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
So it's time to start with a clean slate, in literal sense. I got a new chalkboard, yay, which is actually an old chalkboard. So we're starting with a clean slate and rebooting. Now, say rebooting in the sense of like, when you reboot a computer, right, it clears the cache. It clears out all the clutter.
A reboot?
And so it's important for us to begin a philosophy lesson doing the same thing, right? Clear out the distractions, close your other browser windows, put your phone away, tell the kids to go in the other room, get a pencil and paper in your hand, and start focusing on class, right? So rebooting.
Reboot complete.
Our minds, rebooting our study of philosophy right now.
So first thing, I mentioned the other day, this class is called the Philosophical Quest.
So let's think about this phrase, the philosophical quest. And in a minute, we're gonna come back to this word philosophical and think about what it means. But first, let's think about the word quest. So the word quest in English comes from the Latin quaerens. Now, quaerens is a word that has a much richer meaning than just the word quest.
What else do you see in this word quaerens? What other words, English words, come to mind when you think of that word, quaerens? So it's definitely where we get the word quest. Questions, right? It's exactly where we get the word question, inquiry, is questioning, right? Questioning our own understanding, questioning ourselves, questioning our assumptions, questioning our biases, questioning our presuppositions, questioning everything, right? Questioning what we've been told, questioning what we know, questioning the limitations of our knowledge, like Socrates did at his trial, right? And knowing that he doesn't know, that sort of thing. So questioning ourselves, questioning our understanding, questioning the world around us. So this quest is a journey that involves constant questioning, asking questions of ourselves and those around us, and our assumptions and those sort of things. Inquiry is another one, right? Questioning ourselves, questioning our own thoughts, questioning our own, all those sort of things, right? So an inquiry.
In fact, we even have the word quest in the word questioning, right? So it's a journey of questioning. It's how we quest. So we have some goal in mind. We have something that we're seeking, and then we begin to question our own understanding, right? So philosophy begins with a certain kind of skepticism, being skeptical of, the world that we see, being skeptical of our understanding of this world, being skeptical of our own perception and our interpretation or understanding of that perception, asking questions like, am I seeing the big picture? Do I have all of the facts?
Barely.
Right?
I don't have all the facts.
If your kid gets arrested or something, then you want to ask questions like, wait, what happened? Was this your fault? Did you do something wrong? Did you get caught up with something, right? You want to ask questions. You want a whole set, like, tell me everything that's going on. Let me see if I get all of the information. So that's a kind of questioning to find out the facts, right? So philosophy is a quest of asking those kind of questions.
Wait, what's happening?
But the kind of questions that philosophy asks may also be, certainly those kind of questions, like, am I seeing everything? Am I seeing it all? Do I have all the information? Am I seeing things in the right way?
What?
But it also may be asking questions about ourselves. Like, what does it mean to be me? Who am I?
I don't know.
We might also think of quaerens and this sort of questioning as a sort of process, right? So not just a quest, but a questing.
What is a quest? What makes something a quest? So it's something with a goal, right? In order to have a quest, there's got to be some kind of goal associated with it. Yeah, I think that's definitely true, right? What else? So a journey, some kind of journey, right? And that hero's journey is, it's usually the journey of somebody becoming a hero, right? So they're driven by some goal and they go on some journey, and that journey usually involves challenges, difficulties, obstacles, all sorts of trials, right? And throughout that, they begin to learn about themselves, right? And learn about the world and what they can do. And it sort of defines a person, right?
But at a true quest.
The hero's quest is...
Read The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell.
Or the hero's journey is that sort of becoming that hero, right? They're finding out who they are and what makes them...
Luke Skywalker this, Luke Skywalker that.
And it begins with some sort of initiation, some sort of launching, some sort of leaving, right? So you've got to kind of like launch or lift anchor, right? Sort of detach, right? Go from where you are, leave where you are, leave your home base or whatever.
On a hero's transformational journey or whatever.
Anchor is something that's going to sort of anchor this entire course. Maybe I'll even get better at drawing an anchor. So a quest is some sort of journey with a particular goal in mind, and through that journey, you discover yourself and those around you, and the world around you, and that kind of stuff. And it's driven by some particular goal. So if this is going to be a quest, then we have to figure out what is the goal of philosophy, right? So if it's a philosophical quest, then what is the goal?
Right? So it's a particular kind of quest. It's a quest with particular goals. So what is the goal of philosophy? What is the goal that philosophers are seeking or trying to understand, right? So quaerens is also kind of a seeking, a questioning, a journey, right? A quest of questioning, which has a particular goal. And what is that goal? What is the goal of philosophy?
What is the primary goal?
The short answer, I guess, would be in that word itself, right? The love of wisdom. So it's a quest for wisdom. But there's something even more particular that philosophers may have in mind, and that is, what is real?
Define real.
It's a quest for the real. But philosophers philosophers think about the word real a lot. What does it mean? What do we mean by the word real? What is real?
How do you define real?
So we're going to come back to that in a moment. The short answer is, what is real is what is unchanging, what is permanent, what's always true, right? Truth is always true. So what are those truths that are always true in every context? And as we'll see in a moment, the question of what is real is both simple and very complex. So we'll come back to that. Let's now think about this other word, philosophical. What is the word philosophical? What is the act of philosophy? What does it mean to do philosophy? What's the difference between doing philosophy and studying philosophy? So let's ask that next. The word philosophy has two components, Philos
and Sophia. Anybody know what Philos means? Sophia? So Philos means love, like the city of Philadelphia. Philadelphia is brothers, so the city of brotherly love.
City of brotherly love isn't Philadelphia, it's Detroit.
So Philos means love, and Sophia means wisdom.
The philosophy is the love of wisdom, but also, as Socrates points out, it's also the wisdom that comes from love, right? It's the relationship between love and wisdom, and thinking about what is love and what is wisdom. And the more you ask these questions, the more you fall in love with the pursuit of wisdom. So philosophy is a kind of quest, right? A journey, a never-ending journey. The goal is always somewhat out of reach, right? We're trying to come closer and closer to the truth without ever actually getting there. The lover of wisdom is not the possessor of wisdom.
Right? If you love a person, you don't possess that person, right? You give that person freedom. You give that person autonomy, right? To love someone, to love something is to set them free, right? To allow them to be themselves and allow them to be free. So Socrates said that the lover of wisdom is not the possessor of wisdom. How did Socrates die? Anybody know how Socrates died? Yeah, by the government. Yeah, he was executed. So he was executed by the government. So murdered by the government, yeah. And you're right, forced to take hemlock, poison, to drink poison. And at his trial, he, was asked, are you wiser than other people? It was kind of a trick question. They said the Oracle of Delphi said that you're wiser than other people. Is that true, right? And if he said yes, then he's like insulting all of his jurors, right, and all the people on the jury.
I'm smarter than you.
And if he says no, then he's committing blasphemy, which is against the law, by saying that the Oracle of Delphi was wrong. So trick question. And his answer, being pretty smart, pretty wise, he says that if I am wiser than other people, it's because I know that I don't know, right? I know the limits of my own knowledge. I know that I'm not wise, right? So if I'm wiser than other people, it's because I know my own ignorance. He said that a lot. We'll look at that passage in Plato's Phaedrus dialogue later in the semester, where he says that I know my own ignorance. I'm like an empty jar
Filled like an empty jar by the words of others streaming in through my ears. Though I'm so
foolish that I've forgotten where and from whom they came, right? So the best ideas always come from outside. So so the lover of wisdom is not the possessor of wisdom. What about wisdom? So what's the difference between wisdom and knowledge? What's the difference between wisdom and knowledge? Anybody want to give it a shot? There's a difference between wisdom and knowledge, right? Okay, good. So knowledge you can get from reading, and wisdom is more spiritual. Yeah, by that. Somebody else? Okay, concrete facts, data, information, right? That kind of stuff. I think most people think of knowledge that way. Then what is wisdom, though? Have you ever heard the old saying, knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad? Knowledge is knowing that tomato is a fruit, right? But wisdom, where do we think about wisdom coming from? So yeah, we think about knowledge usually coming from a book. What about wisdom? But I know some pretty old people that aren't very wise, right? I know some pretty young people who are pretty wise, right? So yeah, I mean, we often associate wisdom with age, but it's not always the case, right? So what's the difference? Where does that wisdom that often comes with age, but not always? What about experience? I think there's some connection between knowledge or wisdom and experience. Like when you go through something. I mean, what about the wisdom of love? How does someone become wise about love?
Now, what I want to do now is distinguish between philosophy as this quest, this love of wisdom that's always in pursuit of its goal without ever possessing it, but nevertheless on this endless quest for wisdom. What's the difference between that and what I want to call Philosophy-ology? So Philosophy-ology then would be the logy, the study of the love of wisdom. So the wisdom of love and the love of wisdom. But it's the study of that. It's not the doing of it, but it's the studying of it. So what does this person love about wisdom? But if you're going to study love, right? If philosophy is the love of wisdom, then studying love is different than being in love, right? I mean, if you don't know what love is,
Love. What is love?
and you go and you look it up in the dictionary,
There'd be a definition entry of love in the dictionary? Yeah? Does that tell you what love is?
you still don't know what love is,
I want to know what love is.
right? Love is not something that can be defined in a dictionary. Love is something that you feel. Likewise, the love of wisdom is something that comes from within, right? It's not something you can study what others have said about philosophy. You can study the knowledge of others, but that's different than loving wisdom, right? So the study of philosophy is different than the doing of philosophy. So I put it over here in the side so that we can carefully distinguish between philosophy-ology, which is not what we're doing, although we'll do a little bit of it. You can't avoid doing some of it. So it's helpful to hear what Socrates and helpful to hear what Plato and helpful to hear what, these other thinkers have thought, and their love of wisdom comes through in their writing and their thoughts. And so we want to get a taste of that. Philosophy entails a certain amount of philosophy-ology, listening to others and studying what others have said.
Well, that's fine for something-ology,
but that's different than the doing of philosophy. So what is the doing of philosophy?
So, next I'm going to give you a definition of philosophy. This absolutely would be an exam question.
The answer that we're using for this course is the answer that Socrates gave, which is that philosophy is a kind of discourse. It's a kind of dialogue.
Let's talk.
It's a conversation, right? Discussions that we have. Socrates said that we can't write philosophy. Philosophy cannot be written down, and that philosophy becomes distorted and perverted if it's written down.
If something's worth saying, it's worth eye contact.
That philosophy can only happen through discourse, through dialogue, which is part of why Socrates didn't write anything. He described writing as masturbating on the page, just spilling the seeds on dry parchment.
Never ever spill your seeds.
When where these seeds of knowledge and these seeds of wisdom need to be is in the soil of our minds, right?
So those philosophical seeds belong in minds, right? That's where they can grow. So these seeds of wisdom get planted in different human minds, and that's where they can grow.
So philosophy only takes root in our minds, and so philosophical discourse is what philosophy is. It's a kind of speech, it's a kind of discussion, which requires more than one person.
So that's philosophy.
It requires more than one person, right? So philosophy is a discourse. So how do I teach philosophy in a room alone talking to a camera? Well, I can't in some sense, right? I'm just doing philosophy-ology, teaching about what is philosophy, but I'm also maybe giving some instructions about how to do philosophy.
Plato always wrote dialogues, right? Dialogues. Dialogue is a kind of discourse. And those dialogues, they're like plays, right? They're like performance. They're like plays, right? There's even blocking and like what they're wearing and all kinds of stuff, right?
Speak then.
All right, you know what I'll do?
What?
I'll cover my head. That way, when I'm speaking, I can go as fast as I possibly can, and I won't get embarrassed having to look at you and lose the thread of my thought.
So they're plays, they're performances, and they're dialogues. They're back and forth, usually between Socrates, right? Socrates is kind of a main character of Plato's dialogues. That's how we know what he said, right? But Plato didn't write it like Socrates said this. He wrote it as little plays, right? Little performances, little dialogues and discourses where there's back and forth. So philosophy is a mode of discourse. So this is my thesis statement for the semester. Philosophy is a mode of discourse for the sake of training the intellect by cultivating a desire for wisdom and truth through inspiration. It's a mode of discourse that has a particular goal, right? Some sort of has a particular goal, has a particular purpose. So philosophy is a mode of discourse for the sake of, which is a fancy way of saying like the goal, right? For the sake of training the intellect. What is the intellect? Yes, it's the part of the human person that makes decisions, right? It doesn't just help you make decisions, it's the part of you that makes decisions, right? So training the intellect means training that part of you that makes decisions. Right? Pretty useful, handy thing, right? We can gain wisdom through experience, but we can also gain wisdom by learning from the experiences of others, right? By listening to others. So philosophy is a mode of discourse for the sake of training the intellect. How? By cultivating. If you're cultivating something, you're preparing the ground for it, you're giving it all the nutrients and everything that it needs, right? And allowing it to grow and be itself. So philosophy is a mode of discourse for the sake of training the intellect by cultivating a desire. Desire always requires an object, right? You don't just have desire, you have desire for something, right? So desire for what? Philosophy is a mode of discourse for the sake of training the intellect by cultivating a desire for wisdom and truth through inspiration. By cultivating a desire for wisdom and truth and justice and other things we could put there. And how does it do that? Through inspiration. And when you write that in your notes, please capitalize that S, right? So back to what I was saying earlier about that. There's sort of a spiritual aspect to wisdom, right? So that spirit of wisdom, or that spirit of, it can be a spirit of a person or a spirit of something else, right? That kind of like comes into us, or that inspires us, that we're inspired by a person, or we're inspired by an idea, or we're inspired by nature, landscape, right? All sorts of things can be inspiring.
So inspiring.
And those inspirations, those things that inspire us can, plant that seed of desire for things like wisdom and truth and justice, which then can help us to make decisions that lead towards wisdom and truth and justice. And we gain those through discourse. Cool? So definitely on the final exam, you can expect me to expect you to have that memorized. It's just one sentence.
So anyway, the takeaway then is that philosophy is a kind of discourse. It has to be done through discourse, through dialogue, through conversation. So the videos that I'm giving you here and this sort of information is just setting you up to do philosophy. Now we're doing the Philosophy-ology, the study of philosophy. But in your podcast discussions and discussions with me, then we're doing philosophy.
You need to talk to me?
Right, it's the dialogue, the words that cut across the space that divides us, right? So those words that come from my mind into your mind, those seeds of knowledge that get planted not on parchment or paper, but instead in the minds of the listener, and then they take root there. And if they grow there, if these ideas take root and grow in your mind, then they're going to be different than they are in my mind, right? That's the whole point. This is why the philosopher can never become the possessor of wisdom, because wisdom grows, right? It's one of those things where, like, let's contrast it to economics, what we call zero-sum equations.
It is a zero-sum game.
If I have this chalk, well, there's only this chalk, so if I give you this chalk, then I don't have this chalk anymore, right? If I give you my money, I don't have the money anymore because you got the money.
Yeah, I got your money.
That's what it means to give the money, right? I give it, you got it, I don't have it anymore. Knowledge and wisdom are different though, right? Because I can give you the knowledge that I have and I can give you the wisdom that I have, but then I still have it, right? The wisdom is still in me. The knowledge is still in me. So in that sense, by sharing this wisdom, the wisdom grows. And it's not just that the wisdom grows, but again, if you think about it in terms of seeds, right? These seeds of knowledge or wisdom from my head, when they get planted in yours, in the same way that if we plant a seed in the ground, right, it takes the nutrients from the soil. It takes the energy and the nutrients and the water and everything from its surroundings, and those go into making that plant or whatever it is that's growing, right?
It's a product of the environment.
It becomes different because it's not just the seed, but now it's the seed plus its environment, plus the nutrients in the soil and the energy and the resources around it and its relationship with the other plants and animals and things in its ecosystem, right? The worms that fertilize the soil and decompose and all those kind of things, right?
Because we're all just products of our environment.
Likewise, wisdom, right? Wisdom, when it gets planted in the mind of another person, it grows and it becomes different. So then in your podcast discussions, when you're discussing these things that I'm giving you this philosophy-ology now, right? This study of philosophy. But in your podcasts, that philosophy-ology becomes philosophy again, because then it becomes live, it becomes part of the discourse. So then you can share what's in your head with those around you.
Our minds sharing the same thoughts.
Expressing how you've understood these topics and material in a way that's different than the way that I've understood it, because you're different, right? So you come from differing backgrounds. So that's part of why it's important to identify our perspectival starting point. But that's phenomenology, and we'll cover that next week. But nevertheless, we're giving an overview, right? So that's a sense of what philosophy is. The doing of philosophy only happens through discourse, through dialogue. Whereas the philosophy-ology, which we also have to do a little bit of, which is what these video lectures are, right, is then the study of philosophy, which is different than the practice or the doing of philosophy. In the same way that studying love is different than being in love, which of course is the word philos, love, the love of wisdom.
True love! True love!
So it's this love, this desire for wisdom, and this love and appreciation and acceptance of the wisdom that comes from those around us that drives, that motivates this quest for truth.
I need a break.
And this quest for truth is also a quest for what is real. And so let's take a moment now and clean the slate and clear the cache and begin to think about, what does the word real mean? What do we mean by the word real?
I need a break.
Let's see. How am I going to do this? All right, I know that the thing is you got to look straight at the camera, right? So I'm going to lock on, right? And I might not do the footwork right, but I'm going to do the camera work right.
Focus.
Wait, you know what? I think I'll do better the other way. Oh wait, I forgot this.
Oh, that was gorgeous.
Break's over.
Okay, so let's get real. What does real mean? So real is a word that philosophers use in a different way, perhaps in a more technical, more specific, more narrow way than a lot of other people use. Then we use the word in everyday speech, right? So
Let's get real.
the word real means something slightly different and more narrow in philosophy than we use it. Of course, it has some relevance. It has a lot of relevance to what we understand by the word reality, or, what is real.
We're about to vanish from this reality. It's totally dying. No, it isn't.
But philosophers are always in the pursuit or the quest. The goal of philosophy is to understand what is real, what is truth, right? And real then needs to have a narrow, small definition of what do we mean by real, right? Different philosophers may look at different things and say, well, this is real, or that is real, or this is real, but let's still understand the word real in a, somewhat consistent way. So what do we mean by the word real? Philosophers use the word real to mean that which does not change, that which is unchanging, right? That which is always true. What is real is what is unchanging, what is permanent, what's always true.
That's what's real.
Truth is always true. It should be true in every context, right? If it's true sometimes but not true other times, then it's not truth. If it's real sometimes but not real other times, then it's not really real, right? So what is it? So real means that which is unchanging.
Like closing your eyes to reality doesn't change anything.
So real means that which is unchanging, that which is not changing, that which does not change, that which is always the case, right?
That's real.
So what? So let's think about it a little less abstractly and think about it with the context of one particular question, in particular a question that we'll be asking a lot this semester. What does it mean when we say, who am I, right? Who am I? I don't mean this in the most narrow strand of like, who am I? You already know a bit about who I am. But let's think about that a little bit more. Like, what does it mean? Who am I really? Right? So if we use the word real to mean that which is unchanging, then we have to admit the fact that our identities.
Identity confirmed.
Our identity, the way that we define I and how we understand this word I, varies over time and varies in different contexts. For example, I, whoever I am right now, I am a different person than I was before this whole COVID thing started, right? I think a lot of us are. We understand ourselves, we understand our world, we understand things differently due to the reality of COVID-19. So who am I? I am a different person now than I was before COVID, but I'm also the same person that I was before COVID. So then the question of identity, the question of who am I really, who's the real I, just to have all of a sudden Eminem stuck in my head, like, I'm Slim Shady, yes, I'm the real Shady, all you other Slim Shadys is just imitating, so won't the real Slim Shady please stand up? So who is the real Slim Shady? Who am I? Who is this I that's always there, that's always unchanging? The same I that I refer to now when I use the word I, and the same I that I used before COVID-19 when I understood myself differently, but I was still this I, wasn't I? Wasn't there a real I that's unchanging?
You forgot who I am.
What about, when I was riding a motorcycle around in India many years ago, before kids, right? I was a different person before I had children. Becoming a dad changed who I am. Becoming a dad then changed my identity, because then I had this new identity, father, dad, daddy, right? Which is different than the identity that I didn't have that identity before. So that identity changed who I am and how I understand myself. So again, it's not, in that sense, identity seems to be very changing over time based on context.
I am not the same person I was 2 months ago.
The changing of this I before kids, the changing of this I after COVID.
The same person I was 2 weeks ago.
Right? Or we could go even further back. The I that I was when I was 20, the I that I was when I was in college, the I that I was when I was 10 years old, right? So on the one hand, I am still that person. I still am the same person that I was when I was 10, but my identity has gone through a lot of changes, so many changes that it's hard to even wrap our heads around, right? Our bodies are somewhat the same, but also very different. The cells of our bodies change. Our skin, dies and falls off all the time. So our skin, the cells of our skin is changing, the cells of our hair is changing, the cells of our bodies are changing. We eat, we poop, we urinate.
I gotta go!
Right? And the cells and the chemicals of our body changes over time. Seems to be a lot of change to this question of who am I? I seem to be in a state of constant change. So then the question of who am I really, in a way that doesn't change, becomes a much more difficult philosophical question.
Forgot who I am. Who am I?
The point of it is, though, when we use this word real, we're talking about what does not change, right? So who am I may take into account all those various changing identities, but the philosophical quest is trying to get to something real, like who am I all the time?
The real me.
Is there any aspect of I that is the same in every context at every age?
This is the real me.
Am I the same person that I was when I was 10 minutes old? Because I seem very different to myself. I didn't understand myself very well when I was 10 minutes old. I didn't understand anything much at all when I was 10. I just understood hunger, sleep, right? The point of this is just to get a sense of like, how do philosophers use the word real, and how will we be using the word real in this course? It's the pursuit of that which does not change. The truth that is true in every context. The truth that is always true. The truth that is never not true. And if that's the case, if I'm giving you truth that is always true, then you should be able to look back in your life and your experiences, right? Philosophy is the love of wisdom, and wisdom has something to do with our experiences. So if this truth is always true, then we should be able to look back on our own experiences as a human person and say, facts! Oh yeah, that's true. Here's an example from my life where this was true. Or,
No. I don't think so. No.
that doesn't seem to be true, because here's an example from my life that contradicts at least how I'm understanding that truth, right? Which could either mean that the truth is not true, and therefore not truth, or it could mean that we're not quite understanding it in the right way that it's meant, right? Or there's a differing way to understand it.
That's not what I meant.
And a lot of that comes through discourse. And that's why philosophy has to be done through dialogue, right? So if I give you a truth and say, this truth is always true.
Hey, wait. Is that true, what you said?
Then you should be skeptical of that and then question it. And that questioning, this process of seeking the truth is something that's ongoing through our dialogue, or our piercing words, or words that cut across the distance between us so that we can share these ideas and wisdom through words with one another, and therefore come closer to this unchanging reality, or this unchanging truth, so that we can then apply that to our lives and make better decisions.
You're asking the right questions.
So all that brings us to the next topic.
I'm sorry. Is it break time?
Which is, again, asking this question, what is the doing of philosophy, or what does philosophy do?
What does it do?
But really kind of getting us closer then to that question that we really want to ask and answer in this segment, which is, how does philosophy help us to make better decisions, right? If that's your motivation, I want to learn philosophy because philosophy helps us to make better decisions, then the question is, how?
No, exactly does that work?
Does philosophy, studying philosophy, doing philosophy, how does it help us to make better decisions?
So, how does this work exactly?
And for that, we're going to turn to Socrates' answer to the question and his definition of philosophy as training the intellect.
Having my break.
Except for dance camp. All right, so this is, the kids picked this particular dance.
Yeah, get it. You know what? This is better than the pirouette. You do it, yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
I don't know what to say.
We were on a break!
So Socrates was a great philosopher, lived around 350 BCE. We don't need to worry too much about specific dates, but in that time frame, so about 2,800 years ago or so, a bit longer than that. And Socrates was a great philosopher who didn't write anything, as I've already mentioned a few times, and understood philosophy as a mode of discourse, a kind of, a way of having conversations. And he understood that that mode of discourse that we call philosophy as having a particular purpose and a particular effect on the people who are engaged in those philosophical discussions. So what is that effect? What effect does philosophy do?
What would you say you do here?
What effect does philosophy have? What does it do to our minds? And Socrates' answer to that was, the philosophy is a mode of discourse for the sake of training the intellect. Not that you should study this for the exam, but this is what I'll be looking for on the exam. So what is the goal? What's the goal of philosophy? The goal is training the intellect. Intellect is that which makes decisions. So a simpler way to say all of this is that the goal of philosophy is to help you make better decisions. And so this is the main point of today. Chapter 1 is trying to understand the relationship between philosophy and decision making. How does it help us to make
better decisions. The way that Socrates described that is training the intellect.
Now training, he uses this example.
Plato's Allegory of the Chariot, which is also an allegory of the tripartite soul. Tripartite soul.
In this text that we'll look at later in this semester, the Phaedrus dialogue.
Phaedrus, my friend, where have you been and where are you going?
And in the Phaedrus dialogue, he uses the example of sort of like a chariot driver, right?
Your chariot awaits.
Like if you've got two horses and you're a chariot driver, then, you know, you've got to control these horses. And what if one horse is really good and really disciplined, but the other one is not good and not disciplined at all and just doesn't listen to you and just does whatever the hell it wants to do? Then like,
I can't control this thing!
You know, chariot driving in that case, says Socrates, would be a very difficult thing, right? Because you're like trying to control these horses. And if you want to go here, but the horse wants to go over there because there's a beautiful mare over there or something, then, you know, or some good hay or something to eat, the horse is going to go that way.
My horse lost?
So how do you train the intellect, right? So he understands the intellect as sort of the charioteer, the one that makes the decisions, or the one that's trying to do this, but isn't always in control of these two horses.
So how does it make decisions? Well, it's pulled, the chariot is pulled in these two directions, right? And the charioteer is the intellect, which has to control these two horses, or steer these two horses, or make decisions between these two horses.
And these two horses, we'll come back to them later, but these two horses represent logic and desire, eros. Sometimes we know what we want, and what we want we can reason through and say, yep, this is good for me, I want this, and everything's groovy, and then you make that decision, you feel good about it. Other times you're like, I really want pizza, pizza's not really good for me, but I want pizza, so I'm gonna have pizza.
Pizza!
Right? So sometimes that horse of desire overwhelms our ability to make good decisions. So this is why Socrates says philosophy is like a practice, like having, you know, test decisions, right? Testing. If you're in a situation and you've never been in that situation before, and you've never thought about that situation before, then you don't know how to do, right? Then you're in a state of anxiety because you're like, well, should I do this or this or this? I don't know. I've never been here before. I don't know what to do.
I don't know what to do.
Which is what anxiety is, right? Or part of anxiety. But if you've thought about it before, if you have then that thinking about it before, even if you're in a situation where the situation is, you know, a bit different, it's unique, it's not exactly like you thought about it before, but nevertheless, you're like, all right, I've thought through situations like this before. I have experiences thinking through this decision before. Therefore, I can think through it very quickly and know, all right, well, if I choose this again, it's probably going to turn out like I did last time, and last time it didn't turn out so good, so let me make a different decision this time. Or last time I made this decision and it turned out awesome, let me try that again, right? So that's what wisdom is, the know-how to make good decisions. And Socrates says, you know, when you're having discussions around philosophy, and what you're really discussing is how to make good decisions. And the more you talk about how to make good decisions, sort of a way of preparing for the future, right? Like, all right, I've thought about this situation before, or a situation kind of like this before. And so I've already thought through these particular angles.
I've obviously thought all of this through.
Now that I'm in the situation, there's some new angles that I haven't considered, but nevertheless, that experience of thinking through it, philosophy as a mode of discourse, helps us to train the intellect so that it can make better decisions, so that we can have more control over that horse of desire, is one way to thinking of it, right? And or strengthen that horse of logic so that it can help counteract those desires, right? So then we can think more clearly and make better decisions.
So training the intellect means training that part of you that makes decisions.
So philosophy, as Socrates describes it, is a mode of discourse, has to be done through dialogue, where somebody says, hey, what about this?
What do you think about this?
Then somebody else says,
What do you think about that?
well, let's think about it from this angle. Let's think about it from this angle, right? And what about this? And this is different than my experiences, or this is exactly like my experiences.
It's an opportunity to share your unique experiences.
Then those discourses, the more conversations we have, helps us to train the intellect by thinking more clearly and having more control over our ability to discern between A and not A, between this and that, between the factors or the options, or the pros and the cons, and all those kind of things. So philosophy is a mode of discourse that trains the intellect. It's a process of training. And it's important to keep in mind that training aspect and the fact that Socrates, when he's using this metaphor, or allegory, if you will, of the chariot, it's a very physical straining, right? A training that takes place through this sort of fighting with these two horses, the horse of logic and the horse of desire. And through that sort of struggle, we strengthen those muscles so we can say, all right, I really want this, but I'm going to strengthen my ability to make a decision and say, even though I really want this, it's not the best thing to do, so I'm going to weight the decision making over in this other side more heavily.
Easy for you to say.
We have these competing desires, right? Where desire and logic, sometimes they're lined up, right? If you ever, okay, here's something that I really should do, and I'm really excited, I want to do it. Has that ever happened? Yeah? So when that happens, that's good, right? Then you're far more likely to make that decision, right? Sometimes our desire pulls us one way and logic pulls us the other. Sometimes they're both pulling in the same direction. And so this is what Socrates said. He said that it happens, right? It does happen where you have a desire for one thing, and then you have logically reason that you should do something else. And it sometimes, very rarely happens where you choose that thing that you don't want to do. That's the right thing because you logically reason it out and you listen, the charioteer listens to that horse of logic. Socrates says, but that doesn't happen very much, right? Most of the time we follow our desires, right? So let's unpack this allegory a little bit more. So if philosophy is a mode of discourse for the sake of training the intellect, which is that part of us that makes decisions, and we make decisions based on logic and desire, is this true? Does this seem consistent with your experiences in life? Yeah? So then if this is the case, and you want to make better decisions, it seems to me you have two basic options. What are those two basic options? So Socrates said, basically, this horse, Socrates said, is just really super strong. Really super strong. It's way strong. It's strong. It starts from birth. It's very strong. It's constantly getting stronger. It's always very, very strong. This other horse, right? We're not born with this horse. We kind of have to train this horse, right? And so this horse takes a lot more work. So if this horse is stronger, right? Just naturally, and this horse is weaker, but this horse listens. This one listens really well, right? Tell it to go that way, it goes that way. Never hesitates. This one, you tell it to go that way, and it's like, maybe. I really don't want to have to do that. I want to go over there, right? I'm drawn that way. And so, the horse of logic, you make a decision, you're like, I should go to class today. And the horse of logic's like, yep, let's go to class. And then the horse of desire is like, but I don't want to be a pirate. So then what are the options? So you could just follow your desires, right? Or you could leave it behind. So trying to cut that desire loose, get rid of that desire, that's a philosophy. That's a common philosophy. It's Stoicism, right? Getting rid of that desire, trying to just get rid of that desire, right? Just get rid of this horse, leave it home, right? Like you're saying, leave it in the pasture, and just take this horse out, right? That's Stoicism, actually. But that's not Socrates' solution. So I guess there's three main options. One would be to get rid of our desire, excise our desire, try to get rid of it, right? But it's also it's way strong, right? Why would you want to leave your strongest horse at home? What's some other options?
Try and line up your desires with your logic.
Exactly, right? So if you can reorient your desire, right? If I can reorient my desire so that what I want, like I was saying, right? Sometimes we're not saying, but nodding to, right? Sometimes my logic and my desire line up, right? So if I can logically reason, okay, this is what I should do, and then reorient my desire so that I can make that my desire, the object of my desire, right? Then I've got this horse, which is really mindful, listens. It's a good horse, right? You want that horse on your team, right? But you don't want to like put this horse out to pasture. Instead, you want to strengthen it you don't need to strengthen it. By getting it to want what is good, right? So what was the definition I gave of philosophy? I don't really remember. Philosophy is a mode of discourse for the sake of training the intellect by cultivating a desire for wisdom and truth through inspiration. By cultivating a desire for those higher things like wisdom and truth, then you're reorienting your desire so that you can, right? Logically, we know that wisdom and truth and justice are good things, right? But if we reorient our desire or cultivate a desire, by reorienting our desire towards those things, then we'll make better decisions, right? There's one other way. That's the main way we want to talk about. What's the other way? Yeah. What if you strengthen your logic, right? You got these two horses. This one's super strong. This one's pretty weak, right? But this one mines really well. So if you strengthen your logic, right, beef it up, make it stronger, then it'll be able to carry its own a little bit more with your desire, right? So you're not getting rid of desire, you're not weakening desire, you're not leaving desire at home, but instead you're trying to make logic stronger so that there's more equality between them, right? So that they're both stronger. So philosophy is a mode of discourse in pursuit or for this quest for the real, that which is unchanging, that which is always true, so that we can find out what is always true and then use these truths to help us make better decisions. And the better we are able to think through those things in advance by questioning our own understanding, by questioning one another, by listening to our neighbors and listening to the experts and listening to other perspectives, helps us to think through the issues more clearly and more carefully so that we can make better decisions, which is a process of training the intellect, so that when we are actually in those situations, then we've already kind of thought through some of the issues.
He's thought all this through.
And more importantly, we've kind of built the intellectual muscles, right? So even if we're in a situation that we've never thought about before, in a situation of facts and things that like, well, I never could have foreseen this.
Something no one would ever expect.
Nevertheless, those experiences that I've had of thinking carefully, thinking clearly, thinking confidently, then gives me the confidence to make a good decision in that situation, or the best decision that I can.
Just to like exercise your brain.
So this is part of how philosophy helps us to make good decisions. Now, with all of that in mind, I want to take another quick break.
You're gonna need another break.
Clean the slate again.
Clean slate.
And then begin to shift to the course as a whole and the content of everything that we're going to be doing. So you can get a sense of like all the pieces of this semester, all these little details that we're going to go through here and there, and get a sense of like all these different pieces of philosophical thought and philosophical inquiry or questioning and questing, this journey, this philosophical quest that we're on. So you can see how all those pieces fit together.
All the pieces fit into place.
And really, most importantly, perhaps, coming back to this question, how, right?
How exactly does that work?
So if the reason why you should study philosophy is because philosophy helps you to make good decisions, then how does it do that? And more importantly, perhaps, how does the content of this particular course help you to get there to make good decisions? So what's the relationship between philosophical inquiry or training the intellect and taking action in the world? That's what we're going to cover next.
Can I have a break?
What philosophy should also be about is dancing. And so here we'll go and I got to do this. I got to pay my kids by doing the group.
All about the hips, man. Get flexible with it. Get your knees low.
I gotta get loose.
I gotta limber up, Doc. If you stretch, you need a wide stance.
Okay.
Okay. That man's almost touching the ground back behind you.
I did actually practice this.
Thank you, Cyrus and Lilo. This made my entire week.
My idea of like what to fit into any given course is trying to take, boil down all that learning and things that I've learned over the years from all these great teachers,
in books and things, and boil it down and kind of give you, the tools and the tricks and the ideas that I've found most useful that I think will be most useful to you. And I had this professor, who wasn't just a professor, he was a professor and mentor and teacher and guru and person who was very influential in my life, Reverend Father Dr. Saju Chakalakal. And he's as delightful as his name is to say, Saju Chakalakal. And one of the things, I took a lot of philosophy with him when I was he was my advisor when I was doing my comparative philosophy degree in India. He gave us in class one day this diagram that really just changed how I think about philosophy and just really changed how I think about so many things. It really stuck with me. And so, I don't know if it was his own creation. I think it was. But regardless, I'm passing it on to you. And what I'm giving you is going to be my own version of what he taught. It was essentially this series of concentric circles and thinking about all the different kinds of philosophy, such as ontology, epistemology, philosophy of language, philosophy of mind, philosophy of human person, philosophy of cosmology, thinking about the world, and theology and existentialism and all these other kinds of ologies, aesthetics and ethics, and how do they all fit together, and what do they all have to do with making decisions, taking actions?
Wait, what?
And so if we think about this as like, all right, this are all the different kinds of philosophy, and on the outside are action.
Wait, what?
Outside in.
Can we start over?
All right, when we think about making a decision, right? Right, philosophy is a mode of discourse for the sake of training the intellect. Intellect is that part of you that makes decisions. So why do we study philosophy? In order to help us make better decisions, right? To help you make better decisions. That's the goal of this quest, is to help us make better decisions. So we're trying to think about whenever you're making any decision, right? First step of making any decision is recognizing your possibilities. What are your options, right? What could I do? I could stay in bed. That's an option. Or I could get out of bed. That's another option, right? So in order to make a decision, we kind of have to know what the decision is about. If you wish to reach a good decision on any topic, my boy, there is only one way to begin. You must first know what the decision is about. Otherwise, you're bound to miss your target altogether, right? So you've got this possible action, get out of bed. This possible action, stay in bed. This possible action, this possible action. In any given moment, you got a lot of different possible actions you can take.
And here are all the possible actions I could take right now, right? I could keep going with this, or I could stop and tell a dad joke, just to give an example. What side of a chicken has the most feathers? The outside. I know, that joke was like milk, it was milk is good, but it could be butter. Okay, so we've got all these different kinds of philosophies, and then on the outside we've got actions. How many do you have at any given moment? How many possible actions do you have at any given moment? A lot, right? I mean, pretty close to infinite. I mean, a whole lot, right? At every given moment, there's this other philosopher that we'll talk about in chapter 4. He said at every given moment, we have like all these different possibilities, almost infinite number of possibilities, like tons and tons of possibilities. But there's one possibility that is always there. It's never not there. It's always there at every moment. What do you think that one possibility that's always there at every moment? Death. Death is always a possibility.
You're gonna die! You're gonna die!
We'll go over this when we get to chapter 4. That's what chapter 4 is about. But death defines death as the utmost possibility of absolute impossibility. Which is a fancy, pretentious way of saying
We're all gonna die!
Right, death is the end of all possibilities. And as the thesis statement of chapter 4, philosophy only begins with a meaningful reflection on the reality of death. Like I said, the Kata Upanishad, which we'll come to later in the semester, is a dialogue between Nachiketas, the student, and death, the teacher, right? Why would somebody say that philosophy only begins with a meaningful reflection on the reality of death? What's the relationship between philosophy and death?
Like you're gonna die?
What does that have to do with our decision making?
We're all gonna die anyway.
Hello. or goal setting or desire to get out of bed. Say more. How? And then so you use the time that you have right then, right, to maybe make different kind of decisions.
Oh, I've wasted my life.
That's right, to say, all right, well, I'm going to call mom or I'm going to call dad or whatever, right? So I'm going to make decisions because death is the end of all possibility. When that person's dead, you have no more possibility of interacting with them, right? And then you look around and you're like, well, this person isn't dead yet.
We're not dead yet.
That person isn't dead yet. I'm not dead yet. So then I have these possibilities. So it kind of makes these possibilities which were there, makes them more clear, right? So then death is the utmost possibility of the absolute impossibility, which then helps us to realize, well, I'm not dead yet.
I'm not dead. What? Nothing.
Therefore, I have these possibilities, right?
We're not dead yet, guys.
And when I'm dead, I won't have these possibilities. But until I am, then I have these possibilities, right?
I'm not quite dead, sir.
So when you're making a decision, right, first thing is to kind of figure out what are your possibilities.
So what are our options?
To think about, and sometimes we don't think about possibilities, right? And we think about them later on. It's like, oh yeah, I could have done that. That would have been a better decision, right? If I'd have thought about that at the time. We don't always think about every possibility at the time. I do that constantly after class. It's like I obsess over class and everything, and then I think about, should have said this, or should have done this, or whatever, right?
That would have been way better.
But most of the time, what's our most sort of immediate way of making decisions? You mentioned it earlier. What causes us to make a given decision at a given time? Yeah. Emotions, how we feel, right? What we want to do, how we feel at the time, right? Also states of mind. On the outside ring, so on this outside ring, we're going to put emotions. Let's say if I'm angry, right? Anger is a emotion. If I'm angry, there's going to be some possible actions I could take. When you're angry, really angry, are there some things that they might be possible to do if you weren't angry, but when you are angry, they're not really possibilities? Yeah? When you're angry, technically it's possible, but because you're angry, you can't do them. So if you were to chill out, then there's possibilities I can do. Are there possibilities that you can't do when you're chill, that you can do when you're angry? Yeah, believe me, there are. Sometimes you need to be angry. Chase this guy out of, anyway, doesn't matter. Sometimes you need to be angry in order to do the right thing. There's some things that you can't really do when you're not angry, and there's definitely some things that you can't do if you are angry, right? So if you're angry, certain possible actions are open to you and certain are not. When you're chill, there's certain possibilities that aren't open to you when you're what about states of mind? So emotions are one of them. What about sadness? When you're sad, are there certain things that you do because you're sad?
Whoa, sadness! Sadness, stop!
Decisions that you make when you look back and you're like, I shouldn't have done that, but I did it because I was very sad.
I was sad. I was lonely.
Yeah, that happens to everybody, right? Happy, some things that you can't do when you're not happy.
I'm so happy. I'm so happy.
Some things you can do when you are happy.
I'm so happy!
So we'll also put states of mind here. What do I mean by states of mind? When I say states of mind, what comes to your mind? Can we list some states of mind that affect how your mind is thinking at that moment? So I want to draw a little bit of a distinction between emotions and states of mind. They're really similar, right? That's why I put them on the same ring. They're on the same ring. Whenever I say systematic philosophy, which is the subtitle of today's lecture, right? Chapter 1, launching systematic philosophy. And we're kind of doing systematic philosophy now and going outside in. So we're on the outside ring of systematic philosophy. So emotions and states of mind are on this outside ring. Why are they on the outside? Because outside of the circle, on the outside ring of all these circles, or outside all these circles, are all these possible actions we can take, right? Philosophy is a mode of discourse for the sake of training the intellect. Intellect is that which helps us make better decisions. In order to make better decisions, we got to think about the possible actions that one can take and why we take those so that we can make better decisions. Understanding the role that emotions play is part of that, right? So emotions have an impact on the decisions that we make and the actions that we take. right? So do states of mind. So what do we mean by states of mind?
Your brain's like,
I am just confused.
I'm totally confused.
I am confused.
I am confused.
Good, good. Confusion is a part of life, as are vengeance, fear, and love.
States of mind isn't exactly the same thing as emotion, but it's also not altogether different than emotion. But, if you're in a altered state of mind, right? So altered states of mind can have a big impact on how we think and the actions that we take. So, we should include like exhaustion, being tired, being, sleepy. That can have a big impact on the actions that we take and how we think carefully through things or not. Whether we're alert and in a state of what we call fight or flight, right? That hyper vigilant state of mind that can have an impact on how we react to the world around us.
We must remain vigilant.
So yeah, various states of mind like vigilance or being in a calm, reflective state.
Yeah, man, everything I read.
Or being in a state of dream, right? So then when we're dreaming, then we take differing actions, or we don't take any actions at all because we're asleep. The state of mind that we're in has an impact on the decisions that we make and the actions that we take.
I've been worried about Hamlet's state of mind.
There could be different names for these kind of things. Mood, emotion, attunement, states of mind. Some connection with each other that we wouldn't want to really draw too, firm of lines between them while recognizing that they're different. So let's keep these categories vague.
Hey, can we start over?
Start over.
Start over.
Outside in.
There's a lot that goes into a decision, right, of what action to take at any given moment, or particularly when you're in a major decision, like what major should I choose for my college major, or what career should I choose? Should I take this job or should I take that job? Should I go to grad school? So many, major decisions that we think through, and so then it's like, should I go to grad school? Should I take this job? Should I, live on a farm? What should I do? Should I get married? Should I not get married? Should I have kids? All these different actions that one can take, the different thought processes that go into that action.
Is this good for the company?
So at the center of this is a particular kind of philosophy. Deep level, you could think of it like the deepest level of philosophy, the study of being. What does it mean to be? What's the meaning of being? What's the meaning of existence? Or what does it mean to be? What does the word to be mean? What does it mean for something to exist, right? Like you could say, does the United States exist? Well, it's, it exists as an idea, as a concept on a map. It exists as a particular history. Does money exist?
I mean, does God exist?
Or does Santa Claus exist?
He didn't exist. What does that mean?
Different ways to think about the nature of existence, what exists and what doesn't exist, etc.
The limit does not exist.
So at the center, we want to put this word ontology.
What does that even mean?
And don't worry too much about what it means right now. We'll come back to it later, right? We're just kind of getting all the pieces of the puzzle into one diagram, one image, and then we'll come back to them and dive into the details of each one as we go through the course. So right now we're going to put ontology at the center of the circle.
Do you feel its ontological being? Do you feel it? What?
So ontology, the study of being. Now, a little bit outside of the circle, we'll keep coming back to these things and they'll begin to make more sense. On the next sort of ring of the circle, let's put epistemology.
It's an epistemological nightmare.
So epistemology is the study of knowledge, the study of what we know, right? So thinking about how do we know what we know, and what do we know, and what's fact and what's true and what's not, what's opinion, and telling the difference. So epistemology, so telling the difference between, questioning our understanding of things, thinking about, like, do I have all the information?
We don't know enough yet.
So you can see, like, if you have some knowledge, if you have some information, then you may make one decision. If you have more information, you may make a different decision, or you may feel more confident in making the decision that you originally planned to make. So what we know, in other words, has an impact on what we do. And it's not just what we know, but how we know it.
How do we know?
So thinking about how we know what we know, and that's epistemology, right? It's the study of knowledge, the basic, not just knowing things, but the study of what we know and how, if we have more information or if we understand what we know in a different way, then it changes how, what actions we might take in a given situation.
But how can we be sure?
Right, so epistemology is in this ring. But also so too is the philosophy of language. So in other words, the words that we use have an impact on the actions that we take. And the words that we use, the way that we define these words. So epistemology also has to do with the way that we define certain words. And, words matter. The words that we use and the way that we define those words matters quite a bit. It matters how we define gender. It matters how we define race. It matters how we define a lot of things. Let me give you an example. So, I could give you lots of examples, but let me use this one. So if we think about these things together, and we take particular words like father, right? And then we ask, ontology is the study of being. So then we ask, what does it mean to be a father, right? So in terms of epistemology, how we define words, how we understand the meaning of words and how we define things, right, can have an impact on how we understand what does it mean to be a father. Now, one definition of father would begin with ejaculation, right? Sperm exits the man, it enters an egg, all of a sudden that man is now a father, right? So fathering has something to do with biology, exchange of bodily fluids, and exchange of genetic information, right? And then boom,
I am your father.
You've got a father. So on one hand, we could define father in that sort of strictly biological sense. And then in that sense, the person may not even know that they're a father. Well, they probably won't know that they're a father at that moment, but they may never know, right? Different kinds of fathers.
He's not my father.
But nevertheless, they are a father from that one definition that's defining father in this very biological sense. But then we also think about fathering, or what does it mean to be a father in terms of taking particular actions, right? So if a father is somebody who changes diapers. Father is somebody who, rocks a baby to sleep. A father is somebody who teaches their kid how to read. A father is somebody who teaches their children how to cook. Father is somebody who teaches their children how to read, or teaches them how to be in the world, right? So fathering has a lot to do with teaching and training and comforting and providing and all sorts of things, right? That you may or may not have a biological connection to that child, but you are still fathering them if you are taking actions that are consistent with that understanding of what does it mean to be a father. So we can see already that the study of what does it mean to be is always going to be mixed up with language that we use, the words that we use, and how we understand those words, which is epistemology. So ontology, so another point of this is that a small shift in ontology can have how we understand the nature of being, can have a big shift in the actions that we take. Likewise, a small shift in epistemology can have a big impact on the actions that we choose, or the actions that we take at any particular moment. All right, let's go outside to the next ring, the horse of desire and the horse of logic. So on this next circle, we'll put logic and desire. So logic and desire. Sometimes they may be in harmony with one another, and sometimes they may be in discord with one another. And so the actions that we take depend on whether or not we're following the horse of logic or the horse of desire, or ideally both. So logic and desire have a lot to say about what particular action we take in a particular moment. And so philosophy is about helping us to learn how to recognize that and understand that, and to some degree come to control that, so that we make decisions, right? Philosophy is a mode of discourse for the sake of training the intellect so that we can make decisions based in logic and desire, not just one or the other.
Sweet Chariot.
The next part of the circle, we're going to talk about what are known as the first principles of philosophy. So the first principles of philosophy, we'll cover that again in Unit 2. But the first principles of philosophy basically come down to these three questions, the three enormous branches of philosophy, centrally important branches of philosophy. But really these three questions, these first principles of philosophy, these three first principles, they're all first. We can't really put one atop of the other. In fact, you can't really answer one of these questions without also answering the other two. You can't answer one without answering all three. So these first principles of philosophy really go, hand in glove with one another. You can't have one without the other. So what are these three? Well, the three basically boil down to three questions. Who am I? Where am I? And why am I here? Those are the three questions that drive these first principles of philosophy. Who am I?
Who am I?
Where am I?
Oh man, where are we, Rick?
And why am I here?
Why are we here?
Now, in philosophical terms, we refer to this as philosophical anthropology, or the study of what does it mean to be a human person? What does it mean to be a human person, right? Philosophy of human person, philosophy of human nature. What does it mean to be a person, right? What does it mean to be human? So who am I?
Who am I?
So we'll call this anthropology, the study of anthropos, or the logic of anthropos. Anthropos just means human person, right? So what does it mean to be human? The study of what it means to be human. But then there's that other question, what is this world around me, right? As we're going through our stages of development, like Freud's, stages of psychosexual development.
He was well enmeshed in what Freud would call the phallic stage of psychosexual development.
And part of this, or Piaget's stages of human development.
Out of the Piaget sensory motor state.
Then part of this is discovering, there's a world that's not me, right? So understanding who I am is to also understand, this marker is not me, right? I can possess it, I can pick it up, I can put it down, but it's not a part of who I am. It's just a tool, right? It's something in the world. It's the thing that's in the world. It's a thing in the cosmos. So this branch of philosophy is called cosmology, or the study of the cosmos. So it include, environmental studies, environmental philosophy, thinking about what does it mean, what is this environment, what is the world that we live in, what's the nature. You could also put physics in here, right, the study in astrophysics and biology, pretty much all the sciences, right? Study of the world, what around us. What is this world? So the question of the study of the world is literally what the word cosmology means, the study of the cosmos, the study of the world. So cosmology, the study of the cosmos, right? So who am I? Where am I? Next is, why am I here?
Why are we here?
Right? What's the meaning of why are any of us here? What does it mean? What's the meaning or purpose of life? So these sort of big existential questions we'll call existentialism.
Existential crisis stuff.
So anthropology, the study of what it means to be human. Cosmology, the study of the world. Existentialism, the study of what is the meaning and purpose of existence? What does it mean to be? Why am I here?
They are way existential.
You can't answer any of these questions without answering all three of them. So we really need to think systematically about philosophy. But the first principles of philosophy are these three things. Who am I? Where am I? Why am I here? Cosmology, anthropology, and existentialism.
Is it over yet?
There's this other philosopher known as Paul, just simply as Paul. And Paul writes at one point that, I do not do what I want to do. I do the very thing that I don't want to do. So sometimes we reason like, okay, this is what I want to do. I have this desire to do this. I reason that this is the good thing.
You know the right thing to do here.
Right? So I want to do this. I know that it's a good thing. I reason through it. Language, I understand myself in this way. I understand the world in this way. I understand that this is the right thing to do. Right? Here's the ethical right thing to do. And yet still we do something else. We do the other thing. Right? So what causes us sometimes to want something good, know what the good thing is, reason through it in all these terms, and yet still take an action that's contrary to those philosophical understandings? And the answer to that question, I think, has to be emotion.
We already talked about this.
Calm, contemplative, right? Making decisions in the right frame of mind, some people might say, right? But then sometimes our emotions get the better of us, you could say, or we get angry, we get enraged even, or we get sad, or we get depressed, or we get anxious, and all those sort of emotional states of mind can have they definitely have an enormous impact on what decisions we make. But there's also a lot of things that just aren't in here that we can't quite, that are really important philosophical concepts and topics that just don't quite fit into this diagram. If I were super cool, then one of the ways that I would make this so much better is to make it 3D, right? So that it's not just like a circle, but a sphere, right? The core of philosophy is there in ontology, and you have all these different possibilities of ontology that's going to be affected by epistemology and language in this sort of fluid way, but that they're a bit outside of the, our understanding of the nature of being, or what it means to be. Where would we put aesthetics?
No aesthetic beauty whatsoever.
By aesthetics, a sense of beauty, a sense of awe, a sense of wonder, a sense of beauty, right? So beauty doesn't just mean physical beauty, but it could also be beautiful music, which shapes our emotions and causes us to look inward. Or
poetry, beauty, romance, love. These are what we stay alive for.
The aesthetic beauty of nature and landscape and the harmony of how things fit together.
Words.
Peace out.